Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a behavior analyst.
I'm Molly. I'm a speech and language therapist.
And I'm Alice. I'm part of the marketing team, and I know nothing about this.
We had Alice on today to kind of help facilitate some questions that listeners might have or things kind of from an outside point of view. But today we're going to be talking about Gestalt language processing and what that looks like in our learners, what we do in the classroom, things like that.
So for anyone who's new to this topic, can you explain in simple terms what Gestalt, I can pronounce that, Gestalt language processing actually is?
Yeah, so Sarah, when you think of like typically developing language or analytic language development, what do you normally think of?
So like starting with babbling and speech sounds and then moving into single words, then 2 words and then sentences, like building that way.
Yeah, exactly. So Gestalt language development goes opposite of when we think about traditional language development. So children often start by acquiring whole entire chunks of language, and these can be learned from TV shows, media, anything heard in the environment. But the single words within the phrase don't contain meaning. So they go from large chunks of language and then back into single words, phrases, grammar, things like that. So they're moving opposite from the more traditional language development.
That was so interesting. Like, so how is that different from the way most people think of like typical language development?
Yeah, so it's just essentially moving backwards. And so, yeah, they're starting larger and then going smaller, and then we start to see more of that development trajectory from the single words into phrases, into grammar, and then expand.
And when did you guys first come across GLP in your own practice, and what kind of drew you into it?
I came across it when I was practicing in the United States. I was working with AAC users, so high-tech AAC users, and I noticed that a lot of them were developing and using language differently than what I was taught in graduate school. And so I took some training courses, discovered Gestalt language processing, and kind of have been working on it ever since.
Yeah. So Molly actually introduced me to the term when we started working together, and when she was identifying learners in my classroom as being Gestalt language processors. But once I kind of knew what it meant, I could look back at my experience from years ago as an RBT and say, oh, that learner, that client that I worked with was probably a Gestalt language processor. So I think even though the term is relatively new to me, I have been working with Gestalt language processors for a long time, but didn't necessarily know what that meant or how to support them best.
Exactly.
What are some early signs that a child might be a Gestalt language processor?
So it's really interesting. So a lot of times with our Gestalt language processors, you'll see them watch. This is what we see often in the classroom and everything, is watching the same scene of a show over and over and over again. So they might pull up season 1, episode 2, and scroll directly to 3 minutes, 20 seconds, play 30 seconds of the clip, and then go back and watch it again. So they're not watching the entire episode. They're using that one line to convey meaning. They also might be very musically inclined. So parents might report that they're musical or they're singing or humming or other things.
Yeah, we've had learners who can like sing entire songs but can't use single words.
Exactly.
Or they just sing the tune of a song without using any words.
Exactly. That's also very common where they will, be able to sing a song but not have any true words. A lot of times they're hyperlexic, so they can read. What's interesting with that is because they're processing language in whole chunks and not the single parts of it, they can read a whole word, but if you ask them what letter is this, they won't be able to identify or label the letter. So in their minds, if they're singing the ABCs or the alphabet song, A to Z is one thing, and the letters in between don't have meaning. Another one, sorry, now I'm going
No,
on.
no.
Is
This is good.
they often learn how to speak or type or write or anything in multiple different languages is one we see a lot. So we have kids who will often be watching videos in Polish and Spanish and all sorts of different languages, and that's also very common. But yeah.
No, that's so interesting, and I'm trying to form my question.
You're fine.
But so, for example, if they were singing a song, would they be trying to convey what they mean through that song?
Yes.
Okay.
So a lot of times what's happening is their gestalts can be derived from anything. So it can be language heard at home, videos, songs, anything. Books. Yeah, we have a lot of learners at Park House who love books. And within that, they're conveying meaning from an emotionally charged thing. So for example, let's say they were at home and they were watching Peppa Pig. You have some good examples.
It's always Peppa Pig.
Always Peppa Pig. And their little sibling fell down at home. They might now associate something bad happening with the show in the line they were watching from Peppa Pig. So for us, if we don't have that context, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So if they're like, fire, fire, daddy pig, and you know, we're at school and they're in soft play, you might be like, I'm not really sure what that means.
Mhm.
And then you get some context from their parents or go back and watch the show and you're like, oh, the kid next to you in soft play fell down. Your sister fell down when you were watching that show. And that's what you're saying when you use that line.
Because one of my questions was going to be, why is it such an important concept for parents and educators to understand? But I suppose that kind of leads into that, really.
Yeah, I think we all we talk about a lot how everyone communicates differently. And it's not just the mode of communication, whether it's AAC, sign, vocal, but like the actual way in which Gestalt language processors understand language and the way they use it is completely different than what most people would expect.
Yeah.
And so, like, putting together kind of, we talk about like the puzzle pieces of what does this script, what does this chunk of language mean for that child? It may sound like they're just quoting random lines from a show or a book, but it actually has emotional meaning based on either the context in which they experienced it or the context of what's happening in the show or book.
Yeah.
I was gonna say singing songs is a really easy example, but a learner who was really upset and crying sang one of the feelings songs that we listened to in registration. He was singing like, when I'm sad, I cry. And he's like, okay, I understand that, this is what the video has shown me. When I'm sad, I cry. And so I'm gonna say that to convey that I'm also feeling sad.
Definitely. And I think for parents and educators, it's kind of easy to miss some of those context clues because, you're going about your life, you're managing a classroom or you're managing your home, and sometimes it's easy to miss those things. And so just if you can start to identify that your child may be a Gestalt language processor, being more in tune with what they're watching or what's going on around them while they're watching something or using a book or what they're singing is really helpful, because Sarah will tell me all the time, she'll send me an email, hey, so-and-so's mom reported he's now loving this show. And that's really important for parents to tell us, because then if they do say or even act out we get a lot of acting as well. If they say or acting out a new Gestalt, we can figure out what the meaning is behind it.
No, that's really interesting. No, I would never have known any of that, actually. I just have a question that's quite relevant to this. So why is it important not to ask too many questions or to correct their language?
That's a good question. This is something else that Sarah and I have worked closely together on, how to modify some of the language in the classroom. So this is gonna take me into a whole nother side now, but so there are 5 to 6 stages of Gestalt language processing. And as a child moves through the stages, they start to, I guess, understand the individual units of language. So you go from whole chunks of language, then you might start mixing and matching. So the child might start combining two already acquired scripts. And then they move into grammar, pronouns, questions, that more complex language style. With our Gestalt learners that are more early in stages 1 or 2, who, what, when, where, and why don't hold meaning. So those question words of what are you doing does not hold any sort of meaning to them.
What you might get in response is if you say, you know, what's your name? You might just get the learner echoing back, what's your name? Because it's heard as that whole chunk of language. The individual words, those WH words doesn't mean anything to them. So they'll just, what's your name? And we're like, that's what you're telling me, what's your name? It's more of, they don't understand kind of the back and forth of the conversation yet, because the whole chunk is what has meaning.
Yeah, and a lot of times, like you said, you'll get that what's your name in response, because a lot of our learners have learned that if they just repeat back what was said because they're not understanding, it'll kind of, will leave them alone. Or like give them the answer, I guess. But do you want to talk a little bit, Sarah, about how you've implemented that change in the classroom and about how you've kind of taken this and changed the way you?
Yeah, I think with asking questions, it is something that we try not to ask those open-ended questions, giving like clear fixed choices, not what do you want to do next, or but do you want to do this, or do you want to do this, and using objects, pictures, like other visual modes to communicate our meaning is a big part of it for us. And
you also do a good job. No, that was it. You also do a really good job of pairing the word with meaning and modeling. So like in the classroom, I see it all the time with her. If a child is talking in a Gestalt or using a script, her class and me have spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos and reading books, and we watched all the Peppa Pig shows. And so a lot of times we are able to decipher the script or what they're meaning. And so you always offer that functional alternative. So if they're saying, what's the move out of the way?
Oh, out of the way, everyone, my sister's having a baby was the script that one of our learners used. And we kind of put those puzzle pieces together and learned that, so Peppa, I don't even think it was Peppa, I don't know where it came from, was saying it in a really crowded, like, hospital waiting room or, waiting for a bus or something. So it was really frantic, overwhelming situation in the show where that line was being said. For this pupil, when he felt he was being crowded and overwhelmed, to say, out of the way, everyone, my sister's having a baby. So we learned kind of that it meant, you're too close to me, I need space. So we started modeling, like, we'd repeat, okay, out of the way, everyone, move, space, I need room, things like that. So we would model alternative, more functional, like more easily understandable language to other people around who might not know that my sister's having a baby, you're too close to me.
Might not be able to piece that together. Exactly. And the thing with our Gestalt learners too is since they are so emotionally charged and so, they're hearing the melody of the language, they're going to pick and choose what resonates with them and what doesn't, which is why it's important, like she said, to model many different types of phrases. So instead of just modeling move, you can model move, watch out, or I need space, because we're not sure which one is going to resonate with them and which one they're going to choose to learn or use.
Yeah, we had a learner last year who really wanted the chocolate brownie from his lunchbox. So I was snack, chocolate, cake. I was offering him all these to eat, food, all these different words. And he looked at me and he was the chocolate brownie. And I was like, okay, that's the word he chose to use. That's what he decided was the one that resonated with him. And so that's, honoring that as he kind of worked with the alternatives is really cool to see.
Yeah, and it's very functional. I also do want to say that many Gestalt language processors are also non-speaking. So even if they are not vocally reciting scripts or vocally, singing or anything like that, paying attention again to that media use and songs and melodies, even if they're babbling that really up and down, like where they're modeling the intonation. We kind of already touched on this, but acting out is a big one. So you might see, we had a learner last year who loved Giraffes Can't Dance, the book, and you'd always see him walking around like this. And we realized that's the cover of the book. The giraffe is standing like this.
Yeah, he's got his like neck thrown over the side of
It is one leg and he's dancing. And so it took us a minute to figure that out, but when we did, we realized he wanted to read Giraffes Can't Dance. So just being mindful of that as well. It doesn't always have to be spoken language.
It's interesting with the context, having it, I can see that it's so important to have that context, but I feel like for teachers and for staff, because obviously you're in two different environments, you're in way more than two different environments. So I think I didn't realise how many people needed to understand this really.
Yeah, I think it's something that like we work a lot on, like communicating with parents, and I know Molly has spent so many hours going home and watching all of Peppa Pig to try to find out these contexts, but it is really helpful when we know the background pieces to what's kind of in the environment for a pupil that may be influencing their scripts or where they may have learned things.
Yeah, it's also important because communication is based on trust, right? Like you can sit there, if I was talking to this wall, I can sit there and talk all day, but if it's not talking back to me or I'm not being understood, there's no point in communicating, right? I would just kind of be like, okay, I'm over it, no one's understanding me. And so we see it also a lot where you repeat their script back or you give them a functional alternative and they look at you like you understood me, yeah, and we see them then start to kind of either recite scripts or all of that a lot more because they're realizing they're being understood.
Yeah, I think one of the more practical things in my classroom is like encouraging my staff and people around the learners to repeat the scripts and start to say like, I speak the same language that you're speaking here. And once we start that, you kind of, in my experience, we've seen kind of an explosion of those scripts. We hear more and more different ones and can start to piece together more context. And it is really important to like the rapport building. It's like if you're wanting to communicate with someone who uses Makaton or uses sign language and you are signing to them, they'll be like, oh, you know what I mean when I say this. It's the same thing with using their gestalts.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just building that trust and that foundation of having a reason to communicate and communicating with someone who understands you.
Yeah, because I've got a note here about what kind of adjustments to teaching style can make the biggest difference. And I think we've somewhat answered that, but are there any kind of steps that teachers or parents even could be taking? Sorry.
No.
And one thing that I think you'd sent us notes about it was kind of honoring the script, honoring what the learner or what your child is saying as a functional request or language something. If they say, let's go, Daddy Pig, I'm not gonna sit there and make them say, I want to leave the classroom or go. I'm gonna honor, let's go, Daddy Pig, as their way of communicating, I want to leave. And so I can then offer that alternative, go, leave, I'm finished, whatever it happens to be, but they are communicating in the way that makes sense to them, and I will offer alternatives, but I'm honoring what they've originally said, and I think that has made a big difference in my classroom because these Gestalt language processors, they then know that even if they're communicating in their way, it will be respected. It's what Molly said about building trust. And then in terms of teaching in more of like a classroom setting, we're a lot more mindful of how we're giving instructions, how we're giving prompts. Like I said before, like not asking open-ended questions, not saying, okay, say go, say I want food, like a Gestalt language processor, especially one who has learned that kind of back and forth, will just look at you and say I want food.
Yeah,
and
they will include that.
It'll become the whole chunk again. Or can you find the banana? They'll be like, can you find the banana? Like making
Yeah.
sure we're actually prompting and using our language really mindfully as to not confuse them and provide them with more of these scripts that might end up being connected to some other meaning we don't understand and not the actual skill we're trying to teach. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That does make, I hadn't really thought of that actually what you're saying could be, you know, used as a different script. I don't know if that's making sense now, I'm saying.
Yeah,
but-
anything we say can be picked up as a script. I mean, we've had learners in class who have learned like, radio check home time means it's time to go home because they hear on our radios every day, okay, radio check, time close class, like, is your radio on? They know that means time to go home, so then they'll start saying, radio check.
That's quite sweet.
It's really
like
cute.
that.
But anything we say, so we wanna make sure that the way we're using our language is purposeful and not gonna confuse them.
Yeah.
And is teaching, again, working on those functional alternatives and not just kind of, you know, meaningless, oh, pick up your coat, get this, do that. Like, are we actually are we being mindful about what we're saying to them?
Yeah.
Rambling, but yeah.
You're absolutely correct. And also for our musically inclined ones, it can be really helpful to make it into a song. Like, it's all the time, we're like, I can't really think of a song.
There's one about the out of your mouth, take it out of your mouth, take it out.
Yeah, just turn it into a song, and a lot of times they respond because they're hearing that up and down, and they're like, oh, it's time to hang up my coat, but it was fun, and I get it, and yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me, actually. How many children, so for context, anyone who sort of is new to Beyond Autism, I think we have 5 schools across West London, which are special educational needs schools. But what students kind of in your classes are Gestalt language processors? Is it coming up more and more? Is it quite even?
It is. It's hard to say if it's coming up more and more, or if it's just that the awareness is increasing, because it is a relatively newer thing to our field in terms of being recognized. We work with the newer, the littles, and it's easier to identify in them when they're first coming in, and we're like, oh my gosh, look at this, but you know, what do you think?
I think my perspective on it is a bit skewed because I can look back at my former practice and be like, oh, that kid was definitely Gestalt. But like now that so I'm like, does it feel like there's more now just because I'm better at recognizing the signs? And I think also it can be easy to identify the vocal, like the ones who use spoken language Gestalt processors, where they're probably non-vocal, non-vocal learners who are Gestalt processors who we haven't necessarily identified yet. So I think, I mean, I've generally had about 1 or 2 in my class of 8 the past few years, but there definitely could be more who just we haven't identified yet. I think I'm just a lot better at recognizing the signs and like the signs than I used to be when I didn't know it was know it as a concept.
That's also where it's helpful for parents to let us know kind of what's going on at home, because a lot of it, especially for some of our non-speaking learners, might be media use. And, you know, in the classroom, it's not really like they're getting the chance to use media as they might at home. And so that's another way where we might miss it in school because they're not really on YouTube, or they might not be watching their favorite show. And so, yeah, that's something helpful for parents to let us know.
Because I suppose if you're kind of in the education industry anyway, it's something you might have come across.
Definitely.
But I imagine there's quite a lot of parents out there, let me know in the chat, who might not have heard of it.
Yeah, for sure. And like we said, I think it's becoming more of a commonly recognized thing. That being said, it can also sometimes, I think, be over-identified, especially in autistic individuals, because there are, you know, sometimes they really just might like this show.
Yeah.
They might really, really enjoy this one show. And it's not necessarily that they're a Gestalt language processor, it could just be more of a special interest or something like that. So being able to parse apart whether it's a pattern and something frequently happening versus just really enjoying something.
You can also get like echolalia, which is repeating words, phrases, or anything you hear, but it doesn't have the same meaning that a gestalt would, that the phrase would, because sometimes you can just repeat words without
Just
having
playing around,
language, so you could, like, that could also be.
And how can you, I've actually got that word, I couldn't pronounce it, echolalia, in my notes. So how can you tell the difference between echolalia and purposeful communication in GLP?
Oh, it's so hard because in Gestalt Language Processor, echolalia is always purposeful.
Yeah.
So if it's an identified Gestalt Language Processor, echolalia is how they communicate, and so it should be presumed as always being purposeful.
I think if you have a pupil who you don't know, or maybe don't think is a gestalt language processor, isn't showing some of the other signs of being a gestalt language processor, it could just be more mimicking rather than meaningful. But I think you have to look at the other context and other potential identifiers of gestalt language processor to know if it's meaningful echolalia or just meaning.
No, that's really, really interesting. And then I think one of the other things I wanted to ask about was, we mentioned earlier that gestalts are quite emotionally charged sometimes. And I was wondering, do you have any examples of that within the schools, or kind of any examples that either parents or teachers could maybe be looking out for? Sorry, that's a bit of a
No,
question.
don't worry. You had some good ones in here.
Yeah, I had a learner last year who would, was really frightened of some like light up and noise toys, and he would say like, oh, scary giggle piggle, and we're like, what's that mean? And Mom shared with us that he was afraid of the TV show In the Night Garden.
Understandable.
And that he was very afraid of Iggle Piggle, so anytime he would see a toy that kind of he was afraid of, he'd say, well, it's very Iggle Piggle. So, you know, it's not necessarily that all the toys weren't Iggle Piggle, but he was using that same like based in fear script to show that he was afraid.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've had a student who, when they were sad, they had an AAC device, so they would type using their keyboard. Wah, like wah, no McDonald's was one, which means he was sad, or baby crying. And so either one of those was him communicating that he was feeling sad.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what else. Another learner, Rah Rah the Noisy Lion, also a big one that some of our results come from, would always say like the noisiest lion in the house or something. And I went back, watched the episode, and really what he was telling us was that it was too loud.
That's so interesting. That's quite good, like, that's a lot for you to have to go back through, watch the episode, identify where that's come from, and then understand that. That's
we keep like logs of the episode number, the timestamp, what's happening and what it means, and then we can kind of track their language that way by seeing what they're using, really.
No, that's really interesting to me, because I'm not sure that if somebody had come up to me, and sort of a child had come up to me and said that kind of thing, that I, before this session, wouldn't have initially thought, you're signifying something to me. I would maybe just be like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
And that's really where I started, like, you know, in my early career being like, just saying words. I don't, you know, it's just something they've heard before, but now that like I know what gestalt language processing is, I'm like, okay, now I can be a detective, which is what Molly says, let's be detectives, find out what it means, where it's come from, that sort of thing.
Yeah, just help them feel understood.
Yeah, because I can imagine as a child, or even as an adult really, that's quite lonely. To be communicating something, and you know that you're communicating it, but nobody's hearing it back.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if we can do our part, especially in the service that we work in and kind of our cohort, it's really important. Like we kind of talked about, their faces when they do understand is everything. Are we out of time? Okay.
Brilliant. Well, can I get my words out now? Thank you everyone so much for watching. And if you've got any questions, we'll if you email them to us at outreach@beyondautism.org.uk or pop them in the chat, and we'll get back to you. We'll get back to you with them.
Thank you,
Thank
thanks
you.
Alice for coming along.